And hello, this is Kiki Frey from IMCO, from the International Integrative Maternity Healthcare Organisation, and welcome to this week's webinar. And I'm rapt to have this week an amazing lady with an amazing story, Dr. Sally Dehenley. Sally, say hello.
Hi, welcome everyone. Thank you.
It is great to have you here. And just a little reminder to everybody that, you know, if you, from wherever you are in the world and whatever your role, we always love to hear where you are and what your role is. So feel free to enter that into the chat. And also down the bottom of your screen is the Q&A button as well. So if you've got any questions for Sally, please do put them through. That would just be marvelous. And we'll absolutely make sure that we cover off those questions before the end of today. So it is really quite a specialized topic, and this whole exploring of that family violence topic through the lens of prenatal and perinatal psychology. So but let's just give a little bit of introduction to Sally for those of you that are watching this way later down the track, because and you haven't got to read the poster that we put out about Sally. So Dr. Dehenley is a sociologist, a prenatal and perinatal educator. She's a doula, a CCE, a childbirth educator, and a trauma-informed care practitioner trainer. And her research and her teachings and writing has been really focusing on prenatal and perinatal psychology, that trauma-informed maternity care, family relationships, interpersonal violence. And in addition to attending births and trainings as a childbirth educator and doula, Sally serves as a faculty member for the Birth Equity Leadership Academy, BELLA, and she sits on the board of directors for the New York State Perinatal Association, and was co-director of education for the for APA, for the Association of Perinatal Psychology and Health, and she's the director of Family Womb, and It's Your Coaching consulting. So yeah, very interesting, comprehensive background there. But what we're going to get Sally to do today is she's going to reintroduce herself and give a little bit more information and take over the screen with a PowerPoint presentation. And then we will reunite at the end and go over any questions and queries. And so welcome, Sally.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm going to do my screen share here. So we have this all set.
Fantastic. That looks wonderful.
Perfect. All right. So I want to begin by saying I'm faculty. I'm an academic. So for me, and I'm also a very visual learner. So I find with PowerPoints, as much as I don't like them, I utilize them. But I promise you, I will not read unless it's absolutely critical as we're going through this. So I titled this presentation, "Once You See, You Can't Unsee, and Once You Know, You Can't Unknow," very deliberately. My experience is pretty vast, as Kathy had said, and as many of my students have said over the years. You don't look old enough to have done all of those things. I think that as I've gotten older, my wisdom has increased in terms of looking into some of the things that I've been exploring. And today I hope to expand your definition of integrative maternal and infant child, prenatal and perinatal health, as we explore ways to decrease trauma, reduce rates of abuse and violence in relationships and families, and increase maternal, fetal, child, family, physical, emotional, and spiritual health and wellness, both in our own lives and in our practices and our communities. I'm also well aware, having taught family violence for 20 years, and working in this field, that this information may be triggering. It may result in a reaction, a response in some of you. And I want you to practice self-care as I go through this presentation, pausing as you need to, taking breaths as you need to, drinking if you need to, water if you need to. And I've also purposely inserted red hearts. You'll notice them throughout the PowerPoint, and I invite you to use those as a reminder to give yourself some love as we are going through this presentation. Oops, we do not want it there. All right. So there's a Buddhist Metasuta that I like to use. It says, "Those born and to be born, may all beings be at ease." And that is, in fact, the whole purpose of my work. Those born and to be born, may people be at ease, because what we know is when people are not at ease or at dis-ease, then other things come up in their lives which they need to deal with. So just a quick overview of today. This is, as I said, an interdisciplinary and integrative life course approach. We're going to be looking at family violence prevention, and we're going to look at family violence prevention beginning with at least conception. And the fields that are most relevant in that work are embryology, epigenetics, and family constellation work. We also think about this approach to use during pregnancy, postpartum, and beyond. And here we're looking at the fields of neuroscience and biology, and certainly studies in midwifery and body work and all sorts of other fields as well. But the main field of research that we're going to be drawing from today is prenatal and perinatal psychology. Oddly enough, I went through an entire PhD program with a dissertation on the beliefs, attitudes, and behaviors around pregnancy, birth, and mothering. And I never once heard the word prenatal psychology, pre and perinatal psychology, the term. And so I was quite amazed to find out that research in this field is up to 100 years old. And it looks at the experiences as well as the physical, emotional, and intellectual development, and spiritual development, if you will, as well, of babies and parents and even families. And so moving back to the seeing and knowing piece, my hope is that you'll come to see that trauma, no matter when it was experienced and who it was inflicted by or what the situation was, that it can impact individuals and families for generations. And some of this trauma may have been experienced pre-birth and pre-verbal. So that means it's hidden in a place that it's not as accessible as memories that are from the verbal period and the post-birth period. So I also hope that you have, and you leave with a deep knowing that while many have experienced trauma, healing is possible and anyone can heal. And that's an important piece. I'll also say now, and I'm reiterating that point later, none of this is about blame. All of this is about knowledge. It's about doing the best we can with the information and the support that we have at the time. So I just want to make that point very clear. So my journey and experiences, you can look at this. I mean, I had a scheduled C-section with an epidural for a breech presentation. I told the doctor my baby was breech. He didn't tell me. He doubted me and then realized she was. I had a semi-natural hospital VBAC, meaning I had a HAP block, but no epidural, and I did have a doula there. I had a home birth, HBAC, with 2 midwives, one of which I went on to apprentice with. So speaking of my experiences too, childbirth educator, doula, and I did this, I tried to do this in order of my evolution, what I see as my evolution into this topic. So I hope you appreciate that. I became a childbirth educator. My students would come back to me and would say, great what we're talking about in class, but when I get to the hospital, like it doesn't go that way. Everything changes. It reminds me, my husband's an engineer, and when architects do drawings, if any of your architects, I apologize ahead of time, but when architects do drawings, it's like it looks good on paper, but in the actual practical sense, it doesn't work so well. So I decided to become a doula. Then I started apprenticing with a few midwives in the area. Then I decided I needed credentials, so because no one was listening to me because I was just a mother, and I was, you know, just a childbirth educator and just a doula. So I went back to school and I got my PhD. And I taught for 20 years in family violence. And my topic areas were family violence, family relationships, and sociology of health and medicine, broadly defined. I became a coach. I became a family mediator, a divorce mediator, a Reiki master, prenatal and perinatal educator, a trauma-informed care practitioner, a conflict coach, and then I did some biodynamic cranial sacral studies. As you can see, this is the beauty of, I think, the work that I'm doing, because I pull all of these fields together, because in all of these fields, I have noticed this early trauma. I have met people and worked with people who practice complementary and alternative medicine. I taught complementary and alternative medicine. My own personal family, my personal and family history is we practice herbal medicine, aromatherapy. You can read the rest of them here. Bach flower essences, massage, Reiki. I'm a Reiki master. I use, you know, cell salts. We went to see a Chinese doctor in New York for one of my daughters. So I've done some Chinese medicine background, and I have a history of my own family of extended breastfeeding, the family beds, you know, that whole foods diet, attachment bearing. I tell people my kids were the first ones who had brown bread in school, whole wheat, no corporal punishment. And for most of this stuff, I didn't even know there was a name. I did this because this is what seemed to be coming natural to me. So while I was able to reasonably and successfully, I think, integrate my personal experiences with my professional experiences, my biggest and most profound awakening was when I was introduced to the field of prenatal and perinatal psychology. So I begin this by asking what if, and I did a presentation for Frontier Midwifery School. And this is, I started doing this then, and I've done this ever since, because I think we need to think in terms of what if. So there's many unknowns, right? And this is the issue with research, because I'm as an academic, I'm a scientist. You know, as a non-academic, I'm believe in people and experiences and things that cannot necessarily be seen and explained. So I'm curious. I'm quintessentially curious. What if we reconsider the possibility that conception, pregnancy, and birth-related traumas impact both the woman and the infant or the child's short and long-term physical and emotional well-being? What if it was possible that conduct disorders and a whole slew of other things that we view in our children could be traced to their prenatal and perinatal experiences? What if rates of aggression and violence between intimate partners and family members could be reduced by just instituting a trauma-informed prenatal and perinatal practices? And what if we could mediate some of these factors by practicing and offering integrative healthcare with a trauma-informed perspective? So this slide is for all the professionals here who, like many academic disciplines, don't always see the same thing in the same way, which is not necessarily a bad thing if we want to broaden our perspectives. But I will tell you that having gone through many years of higher education, there are, you know, disciplines, even quantitative and qualitative research. You know, I taught research methods and statistics, and I also taught mixed methods research. And I see the value in all of it. And so this jumping of knowledge, again, thinking of interdisciplinary and integrative, we have to think about this jumping together of knowledge across disciplines, right? It's very disturbing and frightening, I will say, when you go to a care provider and you actually know more than they know. You have a greater awareness of something than they know. I'll give an example: bioidentical hormones. I went to a gynecologist and talked to them about getting bioidentical hormones, and they said, I've never heard of them. And here I had done pretty extensive research on bioidentical hormones, but realized that that practitioner was clearly not the right one for me. I was able to educate them, give them some information, but I knew that they weren't the right practitioner for me. So sometimes specialties are good, and sometimes there does need to be this mixing together. So we have to be careful about research that doesn't consider the sort of maybe the other side. And of course, as a researcher, I'm always interested in outliers as well. I think I'm an outlier sometimes. So one of the things that I think is also really important is an integrative ethical focus. And so if we think about different professions, different practices having different professional standards, I think that it's clear that what we need to do is have an integrative ethical focus. So you'll notice I've highlighted the word honor throughout here, and really that's what it comes down to. Ethics is about honoring the first do no harm Hippocratic oath. And sometimes, as you can see by the illustration I have here, the brain and the heart, and there shouldn't be that competition. There should be the ability to do what's right in your heart at the same time that you have information that is valuable, and you make the decision based on the two. So one of the most important thing, and Stephen Porges is about polyvagal theory. We'll talk about him in a few minutes, but he's about honoring the space. Let me back up. Honoring the space and inviting a sense of emotional and physical safety and connectedness. This safety and connectedness, according to Porges, is an efficient and profound antidote for trauma. And if we can think about people, think about even just white coat syndrome, right? When someone goes to the doctor and their blood pressure goes up, they may sweating, they have all the signs of, sort of low, at least low level, maybe higher level stress, and just visiting a doctor. Research that's been done on NICUs shows that babies are very sensitive to space and this issue of safety and connectedness. So we need to honor the woman, honor the baby, honor the father or partners, honor the sacredness and process of birth, honor the choice of birth, attendance, beliefs, movement, intuitions, healthcare and parenting choices. I have an asterisk, you'll see them throughout. I'm a mandated reporter. I'm a domestic abuse counselor, certified. I'm wide open in terms of beliefs and practices around parenting and healthcare. However, there is a point where people may not be making the best choices and need more information and support. So I want to be mindful that we don't universally honor all healthcare and parenting choices without some discretion and awareness, and that we honor the rights of self-determination, clear and honest explanations. RBA is risk, benefits, and alternatives, and honor your scope of practice and professional standards, which basically means don't practice outside your training. Don't practice outside your field of awareness. It can be very dangerous for your client. It can be very dangerous for you. It's kind of like a little knowledge is dangerous. So if you're a mom, a parent, a dad, whoever you are, make sure that you're educated about something, but realize what is outside of your scope of practice. It's really important. So I want to think in terms of what we see when we meet someone, and even as I've learned to do with this work and have known the necessity of doing, is we look at our own selves. So so when I'm talking through this, I want you to think about what are other people's words, what are our own words, what is the tonality, the inflection in our voices, what is our body language, what are our gestures. I gesticulate a lot. I'm also a very, very touchy person. Those are things that I know about me. But this is the tip of the iceberg piece, right? And I used to draw this on the blackboard or whiteboard in my classroom. But it's really what's underneath that is important. I mean, that truly was the issue with the Titanic, right? It's what they couldn't see, and that was a big thing. And trauma is a big thing. So we have to look at our beliefs, our values, our biases, our prejudice, our experience, our fears, our dreams, our feelings. All of these things are important. I used to say that I used to drive an hour plus to my doctor's appointment when I had my VBAC, spend about almost an hour waiting in the waiting room, see him for about 10 minutes, and then drive the hour home. When I used to go to my midwife, I drove an hour. I was there for 2 hours, maybe more. She served me tea, food oftentimes. And then I had to drive home, but it was never so much because we had talked about things like my dreams, my fears, my experiences, my values and things like that. And it was such an important, she would share information about, herbs and other ways, comfort measures that I could use both during pregnancy and during the birth. So that was very helpful. Unpacking the trauma timeline. So let's just go back to this a second, right? So this is the stuff that we don't see. This is the stuff we see. So we're going to use that in relation to this. Here's unpacking a trauma timeline. Here's an individual. Was a never wanted, no intention to keep baby, relinquished. These are the other terms for it at birth. Spent 6 months in an orphanage. No early attachment and bonding experiences. Wasn't breastfed. Adopted by a couple in their 40s who had another child. Also adopted, 8.5 years old. The mother was considered herself to be barren because she couldn't provide her husband with a child. Now, mind you, these people were born. He was born in 1917. He was born in 1950. She was born in 1917. So I should give you historical data here. Told multiple times growing up that her birth mother was a whore and that the child was going to be just like her. Was threatened multiple times that she would be given back if she wasn't good. Harshly punished as a child, physically and emotionally. Mother was diagnosed with cancer when she was 16, died when she was 17. Married at 19 to a boyfriend of 6 years, gave birth to 3 daughters 3 years apart, divorced after 22 years of marriage, found birth mother 6 months before she died, found out she had a full sister who was also given up for adoption 3 years prior to her birth. So here's one of the old 50s styles orphanage. So I want you to think about what I just told you, this trauma timeline or potential trauma timeline in terms of pre and perinatal roots. So we have epigenetics, right? Epigenetics, epi above the gene, all right? That's the stuff that, so just because you have a genetic predisposition to something doesn't mean it's going to happen to you. Just because you don't have a genetic predisposition doesn't mean if you have one, it will happen to you. If you don't have one, it won't happen to you. But also it goes much wider. And this is the work in family constellation work is looking and some of the works that which started with the Dutch hunger study that goes back and looks at the influence on our physical health, but also our mental health from generations. They've been able to trace it back at least 3. What are the societal experiences that like around us? Like what's going on? What are accepted practices? When I was raising my kids, I had a very, very close circle of friends. These were people who thought very similarly. And that was helpful to me because I was doing things that were out of line with sort of the mainstream societal experience at that time. What is the cultural experience? The parents' own experience. What was conception like? What was implantation like? What was the discovery like? Discovery is when you find out you're pregnant. Was it of joy? Was it of dread? Was it of fear? What was the emotion that came up? What were the prenatal experiences, birth, after birth experiences? What about attachment and bonding and the early family experience? So we know the tree is very strong, right? But it's held together by all these different parts at the back. So if we can go back to this again, if we can start looking at these things, conception, right? Bonding, all of these different parts of the experience, we can begin to see the impact that this can have. So some of these I'm going to go through a little more briefly. If there's questions later, I'm very happy to bring them up and discuss them. So we have the ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. They start, as far as I'm concerned, much too late. We have to go back even further. But the idea is the higher your ACEs, the more problems that you have. It can damage your immune system, increase risk of chronic disease, mental illness, and many believe these traumas are at the root of most violence. So as we are born, Thomas Berney says, how a child is born really determines largely who he becomes and how he views the world around him. And Goes from the Nursery, which was a book that I use in my family's violence class, says that a predisposition to violent behavior can be learned even before birth. This is a picture of my oldest daughter. This is her oldest daughter. She is giving birth to her second of what would be 4 children. And I love this picture, and I use it in many of my presentations, because all I can think of is, what are they learning? right? What is going on between that mother and that child? What is that child learning about being a woman, giving birth? Obstetric violence, I'm not going to read these, but we need to know that there are laws that define obstetric violence. And, you know, one of the biggest pieces of this is a woman's loss of autonomy and the capacity to freely make her own decisions. Now that can be about, again, her birthplace, her birth caregiver, attendant, attendants, who are others that will be there, whether or not she's going to get any kind of drugs or any kind of care, what type of medical, and I'm hesitant to call it medical care because there's a lot of people who believe that midwifery is practicing medicine. And there was never any claim that that midwives were practicing medicine. I'm not a midwife, I should be careful of that. But the idea is that women's basic rights, including respect for their autonomy and their decisions, is protected by law. And it's fair to expect that this kind of trauma also impacts rates of postpartum depression and other perinatal and prenatal mood disorders. So for baby, the birth trauma, cold rooms, you know, bright lights, all the things that Laboyer told us about ages ago in Birth Without Violence. And the problem becomes that trauma goes unrecognized. Or more fundamentally frightening for me is that it's accepted as a normal aspect of pregnancy and birth. And this rage and fear that comes as a result, you know, really impacts, is impacted by the way women are treated by their partners and the medical community, as well as what we see is almost a widespread cultural, fearful perception of pregnancy and birth. So there's stories of the womb. And again, I'm just going to tell you these really, really briefly. Barbara Van Dyson, Bruce Lipton talk about this. William Emerson, though, shares a story from one of his books about a woman who had a little girl who seemed to have this obsessive need to carry around 6 dolls all the time. And so she went to William, who was a psychologist. And after considerable time with her, he learned that the mother had had 6 miscarriages prior to this daughter's birth. And after the mother was able to grieve her loss, the daughter suddenly stopped carrying the dolls around with her. Now, some people may consider this woo-woo, and you know, I'm using that term because that's the term that has been used to me to describe things that people can't fathom. Yet these same people often are able to fathom other things that are also they're not able to see. David Chamberlain, in his book Windows to the Womb, talked about a young woman, Jen. From the time she was 2, she was inconsolable twice a year, Christmas and 4th of July. Sisters found out that Jen had been the product of an affair, and they hypothesized that Jen had had an abortion, or the mother had attempted an abortion, but one twin remained. And just before the 4th of July, the year she was 33, Jen ended her life. 20 years later, a letter from the mother's caretaker was found, and they wrote that the mother had openly wondered if there was any connection between Jen's suicide and an obviously unsuccessful abortion attempt in Uncle P's office on July 4th, 1943. This is what Emerson and others consider a dramatic manifestation of vanishing twin syndrome, which also can create trauma for people and most pregnancies start out as twins. So, you know, it's just, I'm curious. So here's the red hearts. Give yourself a big hug. Some of this can, as I said, be very triggering. So we know about the impact of rejection and separation. I won't go into it here, but the point I want to make is that loneliness and physical pain are processed in the same area of your brain. So separation can be physical, it can be emotional, and it can be destructive for some babies. And babies instinctively know when they're not wanted. And some argue that this is as early as preconception. I know that as I had worked with some of the midwives, they would talk about babies who choose to stay and babies who choose to leave. And it was a little hard for me to understand that to begin with, but in the work that I've been doing, I can understand that more and more. These babies are at a greater risk for social and psychiatric problems, are more often delinquent. And research on psychopathic killers show that they almost universally lack affectionate, supportive relationships in early life. So we need to remember that all behavior is a result of unmet needs. So this is how we start bringing in all of these different professions and all these different experiences and all these different practitioners, because we need to be able to satisfy unmet needs as they present, not later. And this takes a tremendous amount of awareness and support for families, for women prenatally, for dads prenatally, and throughout the pregnancy, birth, and postpartum, at least the early postpartum period. So the new news here is that we are pretty much convinced that the infant experiences needs and emotions long before birth. And this is evident by a variety of different pieces of research that we're not going to go into today. But we also know that unmet needs, as I said, persist into adulthood. And again, going back to Ghosts from the Nursery, they argue that this early stress, abuse and neglect and parental depression, all the lack of stimulation, all of these things are precursors of the epidemic of violence in childhood and adolescence. It also doesn't help when you're the parent of a child who hasn't progressed through these stages of development. It also doesn't, it's also challenging when you are the partner to someone who has not passed through these stages of development, this hierarchy, and did not get what they needed and during this hierarchy of needs. So what I realized is, all of my work, I created a class at Binghamton University called Divorce Culture, Relationships and Developmental Issues. And I missed this part. I want to teach the class again, because what I didn't, while it was a really great class and got international attention, it missed this point. It missed the picking our partners based, we did genealogy, genograms, genealogy, family interviews, all of that, which was a part of this, but I'm convinced it wasn't enough. So we have to be mindful of this. Gabor Mate says emotional deprivation in early childhood fosters the development of violent aggression, and Verney and Chamberlain agree, saying that, relationships between birth trauma and violence, we can also see learning disabilities, epilepsy, hyperactivity, child alcohol, drug abuse, and I would add child abuse and neglect. So if we look at some of the selected research again, Ludwig, Janis, and remember, here's again the need for the intersection and inner working between what's considered to be the professional fields and the other fields, if I can just say it like that, because as I said, I went back to school to get my degree so that people would take me seriously. And really yes, I have more research. Yes, I have more understanding. Yes, I have a wider range. However, I'm not a different person in terms of having a respect for research, but having a respect for lived experience, which may not ever get reported in the research for a variety of reasons. So it is important when you're having these discussions with your care provider, when you're learning about this information, if you're a parent to be or a parent, to learn that there is in fact research out there that can help support you and help educate you, and then hopefully support you. So these experiences, again, conflict, developmental implications, unwanted children receive more psychiatric children, more delinquent, had lower IQ scores. So just, let you know that this research here. There is a therapeutic model that I think is extremely useful among a whole host of others, but it's Polyvagal Theory, and it allows survivors of trauma to reframe their experiences. This is because trauma is often, as I said, sort of in the subconscious piece. And we have to learn how to recognize where it lies before we can work with it. And so we really have to listen, super quiet, aware listening 101 for mothers and baby stories, and observing and working with behavioral and somatic responses. So I just want to share this is polyvagal theory sort of in a nutshell. But what we can see here is that we want to be, and we want people we are around to be, we want our clients, if we're working with people, to be in the social engagement in green. When they start moving into fight or flight and into that's the ventral vagal, social engagement is the ventral vagal. Sympathetic is into the sympathetic nervous system in the fight or flight. And then the next stage is the freeze. And that's, disassociation, depression, shutdown, hopelessness. For animals, this can result in death. For humans, it very rarely does, if ever. But the point is that we have to recognize where we go. I go to freeze. That's my physical response. Well, I flight first, and then I move into freeze. I have to be aware. We have to be aware of when we're moving in between this, and it's especially important for birth workers and for their attendants to be aware of this polyvagal theory. If we think about resilience and repair, we need to really look openly and broadly at our parents and their parents' physical and mental health, their pregnancies, their birth relationships, parenting histories, and things like that. We have to look openly and honestly at our own story and the stories of our friends and our partners. If we're going to be partnered up with somebody and potentially become parents with them somewhere down the line, there's a lot of questions that need to be asked and a lot of work that needs to be done. I can tell you, pre-Cana doesn't begin to cover the information that needs to be covered, as good as it is, or maybe, to be able to work, to be able to choose a partner and enter a relationship with full awareness and honesty, if you haven't done that work on stories. And seeking guidance and assistance from a variety of providers who practice and honor interdisciplinary and integrative healthcare. Sorry about the typo there. And remember, this is never again about blame. It's about conscious, loving inquiry. So for me, the future of integrative care, there's an emphasis on a holistic, multidimensional trauma. There would be an emphasis on a multidimensional trauma-informed care, beginning at least as conception, lasting at least for 3 years. We need more research. We need stories of firsthand experiences of what you do. I remember, let me just give you a quick example. People sometimes feel, I guess, compelled to lie. I'm not a lying person. I went to a well baby clinic, and one of my friends was actually who I worked with through a professional piece because I sat on another board, prenatal and perinatal board. And I went in and they said, well, where does the baby sleep? And I said, she sleeps with me. And they said, oh, well, we can't write that down. Does she have a bedroom? I said, yes. They said, well, does she have a crib? I said, yes, it's filled with clothes and other things right now. But so the baby sleeps in the crib. I said, no, the baby sleeps with me. And she said, well, I can't write that. And she wrote down that the baby slept in a crib in her own room. And I said, you just falsified medical records. And I called my friend Janice upstairs and I said, you got to get down here. You've got nurses that are falsifying medical records. Moreover, you've lost an opportunity to teach someone how to engage in safe sleep practices. Now imagine herbal medicine. Fortunately, I chose a care provider for my family, an FP, family practitioner, that when I eventually went to him, he would say, all right, tell me what you've done. What do you want from me? We had a very complementary relationship. So there is that need for these kinds of firsthand experiences and the ability to be honest. There has to be a deep respect for an honoring of cultural beliefs, traditions, and practices, and the use of complementary and alternative medicine, or alternately, the decision not to treat or fix. Respect for honoring of parenting practices that are not viewed as, typically acceptable and or mainstream. Again, my asterisk shows up on both of these. And the expectation that all care providers, body workers, herbalists, etc., anybody will screen mothers and babies for history of trauma and refer out to other practitioners and care providers as needed. What can we do? Do your own healing work. That's where you start. That's where I started. And I do it all the time. I do it every day. Journaling helps, vision boards, all sorts of things can help. Engaging in all sorts of education and training to broaden your scope of awareness and knowledge and stretch your comfort capacity, personally and professionally. Get extra training and credentials if you need them. Create working relationships with other care providers. Insist on and help create policies and procedures that are mother, baby, and family friendly and trauma informed, and are also accepting of and honoring all of these other things that we've talked about, and then report unsafe or abusive behaviors as warranted, but stay within your fields of expertise. So I just, at this point, just like to invite each of you to just sit back in your chair, take a few deep breaths, center yourself, feel your feet on the floor, feel your contact with whatever you're contacting in terms of your seat. You might want to close your eyes and take a deep breath. You may want to just center and look at the room around you. And when you are ready, we can come back together for questions and breathe.
Oh, that was just so fantastic. Thank you. Thank you so much, Sally. Your insight was just stupendous. There was some particular, I love your, when you go talk about the Wilson quote of, jumping together of knowledge across disciplines to create a common groundwork of explanation. And that's a fantastic quote, as being that most promising path to advancement. And the Porter's quote when you're talking about, that feeling safe and connected emotionally and physically, is an efficient and profound antidote to trauma. This is all probably just, it's kind of like basic stuff, but we need that reminding sometimes, don't we? And your iceberg analogy of the stuff that we see and the stuff that we don't, very special moment of that photo of what must have been for you to see your eldest daughter with her eldest daughter in labour. Just amazing. There's so many brilliant things that you went through there. So one of the questions I would like to ask is, so often, as healthcare professionals, we are expected to screen women during that antenatal period for family violence. And I don't know that many maternity healthcare providers necessarily feel that they always do that in a very effective way. And because you're coming with your iceberg of all your experiences, and on top of that, you don't, often these are women who you are only starting to get to know. And different countries around the world have different policies, but I did my midwifery training in New Zealand, and in New Zealand it's expected, it's in law that that woman should be screened at least 3 times during the antenatal period. And so do you want to maybe give some practical commentary on, when you're meeting somebody for that first time or second time, you're really still kind of strangers, and it's almost invasive kind of getting into their space on something that could be very, very deep and personal for them. So what's maybe some practical wording that maternity healthcare professionals could use with clients, particularly those ones that you're only starting to get to know?
I think that's an excellent question, Kathy. And I'm pleased to hear that that's required of you. It is not required. All it is a check mark on a form at the practitioner's office that I go to. And I've talked to my practitioner, like, why don't you screen for this? Why hasn't anybody ever asked me if I'm a victim of domestic violence or some sort of unsafe conditions? Mm-hmm. And it's funny because I know that I had mentioned earlier when I was, and I'll get to what you're asking, but when I was actively working as a domestic violence counselor, I remember clearly calling them one day and saying, I'm calling you as a client, not as a counselor. Mm. And the switch over of that, the awareness that it hit me, I remember reading this book, Your Verbally Abusive Relationship, and I'd already experienced physical violence from my ex-husband, but the verbally abusive relationship. And my first thought was, someone's been in my house, someone's been listening. And there was this sudden awareness. I wasn't in a place prior to that awareness of being able to have somebody necessarily ask me the question, are you a victim of domestic violence? Because it depends on what your belief systems, your relationship system, how all of those things bring out. So what one person might consider, right?
What
And then
regards as domestic violence, somebody else could have been raised to see that as just, that's how relationships work.
That's how they are. And trust me, I've had my fair share of I've had my fair share with discussions with students over the years about the very topic, and who wears, who's the boss in the family. And so it's a power, right? It's a power differential, and it's true for both heterosexual and same-sex relationships, right? Whether you're married or not married, there are power differentials. So anyway, coming back to the question and awareness, this reminds me of Prochaska's stages of change, because until you realize there is a problem, you are not motivated to change that problem. So recognizing that the issue exists. So ways that you could do are asking certain questions like, do you feel that you're talked to with respect in your home? There's other ways.
That's a brilliant question.
So then it also reminds me of so when I was doing my dissertation, I had to go through the institutional review board, quick story. And I had to go six submissions before they would accept my question on, did your parents hit you? Because I couldn't ask if their parents hit them. I could ask how did I end up wording it? What was your life growing up? Or no, I couldn't ask them if they hit their children, but I could say, do you discipline similarly or differently than your parents? Right? Because some people believe it's okay to beat your children too. So, I mean, they do today in this day and age, they still, right?
Yeah,
so going back to these questions, you've got to be really sensitive. And always coming from the trauma-informed perspective of not what's wrong with you, but what happened to you. So, I mean, sitting down and thinking about if you were one of those people that didn't know, what were the kinds of questions that could elicit that kind of information out of you? Do you feel safe at home? Do you feel respected at home? Who makes decisions about such and such? Right? You start asking some of these questions. Who makes decisions about healthcare? Could be a relevant question, right? But we know that some women aren't able to procure healthcare from certain practitioners because of the beliefs of the husband, partner, or the religion or culture. So you've got to have that deep respect for individuality and not just have this, catch-all question, but rather get to know your person. And you're right. I'm a pretty open person, but I'm not going to fess up to the person I see the first time that, this is what I'm experiencing at home.
I really love that particular question that you had, do you feel respected at home? That is so all-encompassing, isn't it?
It is. It really is.
Yeah. But
those questions need to be asked. They need to be asked. They need to be asked often. And the two things about violence in pregnancy is that around 50% of all domestic violence starts when the woman's pregnant. So women who had not been beat before start getting beaten when they're pregnant.
That's a very relevant statistic. So
also that you have two victims.
To repeat that.
About that, almost 50% of domestic violence starts when a woman is pregnant.
Wow.
Also, there are two victims here.
Yeah.
And so you have to think about there's two victims involved here. And so these are also really important points to consider.
And also that woman needs to be screened when she's alone.
Right. And most women go into their gynecological and prenatal, at least their gynecological visits. Soon as that vaginal exam, takes place, soon as generally speaking, it's I'll leave you a minute, and go out, or it's an opportunity for her to say, or the practitioner to say, and I'm not about excluding people out of the room. Please understand that. But it also is one of the only times where a woman is seen in some state of undress for a regular period, for a period of almost 9 months plus. Think about that.
Yeah, and yes, and also, when women turn up for their antenatal appointments, they need to pee in a cup, and I mean, different countries have different ways that that's dealt with, and different clinics have different ways, but it's very commonplace where I've been practicing in the world, that the women self-check their protein sticks. So they know they arrive, they go to the toilet, they pee in a cup, they dipstick it, and they know that if it's normal, they can see if it's normal or not normal and let us know. And that's that opportunity often, because you need to show that woman that very first time at that very first appointment, and persuading the partner or whoever else is with them just to stay in the clinic so you can take them through to the toilet and show them what to do. And that is that little moment that you can get. But it is such an important area for maternity healthcare providers to feel confident in our own competence of screening and helping women. And I think it is an area that we generally don't feel so confident, unless you've been through it yourself and you've had some kind of extra training, extra insight, extra focus on that area. But certainly, I mean, I'm thinking back to when I did my degree in midwifery, my original training, and we did talk about family violence, but I don't know that we really sort of came away feeling equipped to screen for it, and then what to do with it once.
Right. And that brings up, if I could, that brings up some very good points. First of all, people are not being trained. Care providers, especially in our country, in the United States, I can say that care providers, obstetric and gynecologic care providers, are being inadequately trained about trauma and trauma-informed care. I will tell you that many traditional, careful the word traditional, because if I think traditional, I think midwifery. So we have to be, most mainstream biomedical doctors, OBs, are trained as surgeons, right? And their idea of trauma is something happening as a result of the surgery, or not happening as a result, or happening as a result of not getting the surgery, right? Or the intervention, or the test, or the procedure. They are not trained in other types of trauma. Here's the other thing. What do they do with it? When they ask doctors why they don't cover certain things with their patients, their clients, the number one reason is, I don't have time.
Yeah.
And midwifery, unless you're in a practice that demands that you practice like the OBs, is often different. But I mean, those are they're out of their subject area. They don't know. So we really need to educate.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I'm just thinking of some of the other things that now, if anybody we have gone through questions that have come in, but if there was any other questions that anybody watching live has, to drop those in quickly, because we're almost, really running out of time here. And I'm just thinking of other things. If is there anything that you would like to finish off with that we haven't really quite covered over today? It's about, I guess, that, as you say, increasing awareness, changing in policies and practices. And, it's that more that we learn, the more that we realize we don't know. As you say, you're looking at it going, there's hardly any research on this, or what we have is so outdated. But yeah, I mean, is there any final things that you would like to sort of bring in relating to these? Because of course we've got both birth practitioners watching, we have maternity naturopathic healthcare providers, and I don't know now, I mean, obviously maternity healthcare providers know really that they should be doing some sort of family violence screen, but I don't know that naturopathic providers are always thinking down that track as well. I'm not, whether you go see your medical herbalist or your osteopath, your acupuncturist or your chiropractic, I mean, are they thinking about doing this as well? It's obviously a great opportunity. And then of course we have the mums themselves who are expectant.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
So I think what I would like to close with and share is we are most dangerous when we think we know everything.
Mm.
I mean, we're talking, my oldest daughter is 41. That baby that little girl that you saw watching her mother give birth just turned 15. I am now the grandmother of 10 with another one we just found out last week on the way. So
oh, that's fantastic.
I am, yeah, it is. I'm very blessed.
And no, you don't look old enough to.
Yeah, I never had grandparents. I think what I'll go back to is, do you remember the slide that I covered about the potential trauma tree, right? All
Yes.
the different things that had happened to that person, and,
Yes.
and beginning with being an unwanted child.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was me. That was me. I'm the one that experienced all of that. So what I'd like to leave everybody with is, this is incredibly profound work. This takes us as human beings deep into an area of study that literally is responsible for impacting every single aspect of our lives and every relationship we have, and our health as well, our emotional health and our physical health. And that if we can start seeing people, seeing women, seeing fathers, seeing babies born and unborn, for who they really are, for what their potential is, and to realize that they are thinking, they're sentient, they're thinking, seeing, feeling. As little children, I now have to, be careful when I go out into public, because I'm so passionate about this. But when I hear parents say things to their children, and I think about things I said to my own children, because I, like all parents, was not perfect, strive to be, but was not. I think about the damage. I think about the damage that we're doing to women by not letting them trust, not encouraging them and empowering them to trust their bodies, and trust their intuitions, and to even believe that they have an intuition. Because some women don't even believe that there is such a thing.
Absolutely. And I mean, that's one of my sort of pet things that I've commented on over the years, is that we're being raised with nobody really talking about trusting your intuition, or your gut instinct. And then suddenly you have a baby and there's this term, mother's intuition, and suddenly it can't talk to you, it can't explain to you what's going on or what's wrong. And you have to realize for the first time sometimes that, oh my God, I have to rely on my intuition. And anybody who's a home birth midwife, they use their gut instinct all the time. You have to be very, very aligned with that. And I know that was one of my pet things with raising our children, was that we talked about gut instinct and intuition all the time, and you'd be, I don't know, it might be, oh, there's a school play on and I'm not sure if I want to, be in it or not, or and I say, well, what's your gut intuition telling you? And I'd really like to be on stage with it. Well, do it then, and that sort of thing, that it keeps you safe. And when you're at a party and you think, boy, things are getting cool here, your intuition, it shouldn't be, but so often for women, it's not until they're pregnant, even beyond that, it's not until that baby is born that they suddenly hear the world talking about mother's intuition, and they're like, oh, they feel so ill-equipped because they've never relied on it at all in their entire life.
Right. Well, even from conception, if you think about that, my daughter-in-law last week, who shared that they were pregnant, he said, yeah, she missed her period and she was really sick and throwing up, and I don't know, something else was going on. And he goes, but we had to go to the doctor and get the test, and now we know we're pregnant. It's like, you just breathe. Right?
A lot of signs.
Because
Yeah.
all of those other symptoms weren't even remotely related to you being pregnant. But anyway, and I see that Heidi says osteos, but not routine, questions and answers. And it's just you gotta carry on that conversation. Unfortunately, I think a lot of healthcare practices today, again, not always through any fault of the practitioner, are truncated. They're so short that these kinds of meaningful conversations can't take place. So my antidote to that,
yes, so we need to write it up.
Is to have somebody who can work at your center, who's trained in this, or work in your practice, who's trained in this, that can work with the mom separately. Call it a moms only childbirth class if you want, just to get the moms there and get them in a safe space where they can start talking to other moms with a facilitator. I don't mean to say leader, that was improper. A facilitator of that conversation. One of the things that I've been training in is healing story circles, and I'm offering those now through my own practice, which my other website business. So my new website, The Family Womb, just to say, if you go to it, it's under construction. So there's information there, but there needs to be more. But these healing story circles and safe spaces are so important. So keep asking.
Absolutely.
Create safety. Those are my keep asking and create safety. And be
now,
curious.
The very last thing is now everybody who has registered to see this webinar will receive an automated email in 24 hours with your contact information and more sort of follow-up details. But for those who may be watching this webinar way further down the track, would you just give your contact details, your email
Yes,
address?
I can put it into the chat.
Fantastic.
There's my email address.
There we go. So thefamilywomb@gmail.com. Thefamilywomb, all one word.
And there's my website.
And yeah, the family womb. So
My
fantastic.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. If anybody has any
gmail.com.
questions, they can always reach out to me. And Kathy, it was an absolute pleasure. I've got your book here and going through it, and it's like, I know that, I did that, I used that, and so it's great to have all of that information in one place. We need to have more of this written down. One of the things I realize is we've lost a lot of the grandmothers. We've lost a lot of the Doris Hare, Dione Young, Barbara Kitzinger, Sheila Kitzinger, excuse me. All of these people we're losing. So we've got to get this stuff written so that it's there.
I absolutely agree. Yeah. Thank you so much for your time, Sally. And thank you to those of you who tuned in live. We love to have our live audience. And we know a lot of you watch it later down the track as well. And so we here at IMCO, we just want to wish everybody a lovely rest of their week. And thank you, Sally, for your time. Pleasure. And such an important topic. So farewell, everybody. Thank you. Bye.